I'm Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon, published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today I'm going to be reviewing one of my favorite fantasy novels of all time. The Dragonbone Chair by Tad Williams. Let me tell you something. When I was a kid growing up, first book I ever read, Sword of Shannara. I read J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings next. Then I bounced around to, Lloyd Alexander, Raymond Feist, David Eddings, Dragonlance, a little bit of Thieves' World, a little bit of Elric and Conan, a bunch of Louis L'Amour novels. Wasn't until the Dragonbone Chair came out, and I picked up the Dragonbone Chair and started reading it. It wasn't until that moment that I understood the importance of words, how they fit together on the page, how they looked together on the page, how sentences fit together on the page, how sentences looked on the page, how words created language that could be beautiful and meaningful. It wasn't until Tad Williams' Dragonbone Chair that I realized that. I just thought fantasy books were fun adventures. I wanted to be a fantasy writer. From the beginning, when I first read The Sword of Shannara, when I was just a young boy, it wasn't until I got quite a bit older and picked up the Dragonbone Chair when it first came out that I really started to appreciate the usage of language in writing. Because nobody, and I say nobody, does fantasy writing better than Tad Williams. Just nobody does. Now let's talk about the books. Big fan of this guy. Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn series. It starts with book number 1, The Dragonbone Chair. I've got the paperback here. You can see I've got the hardcover. Stone of Farewell, book number 2. Last book in the trilogy, To Green Angel Tower. I've got them all. Got everything by Tad Williams. He's my second favorite author on the planet after Stephen King. This guy was a hero to me when I was growing up. I worshipped everything that he wrote. Hero to me. I aspired to be like Tad Williams. We'll get to the review of the book in a second, but I want to gush a little bit about how awesome I think this author is. When I was writing Forgetting Moon, if you've watched some of my writing advice videos, I say, I wanted to write big, huge, epic fantasy like this. I wanted to write big, huge, epic fantasy like Tad Williams, George R.R. Martin, like Robert Jordan. I wanted big, epic books like Shogun, Lonesome Dove, Stephen King's The Stand, Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. I wanted to do epic stuff. I wanted to write epic books. And The Forgetting Moon is an epic book. I mean, it is big. It is big like all of the books that I just mentioned. And what I did was I took all those books, including Dragonbone Chair, and I studied everything I could about these books, just to figure out how to write books. Like I said, a lot of my book reviews are kind of halfway writing advice videos. If you want to learn how to write fantasy, I suggest you get the Dragonbone Chair, the first Wheel of Time book, and the first Game of Thrones books, and you study everything these writers are doing. The character walks on scene, you study how many words and paragraphs they use to describe that character. If the characters walk through a forest, you study how many words these people use to describe that forest and that scene. If there's some exposition or a flashback or anything like that, you study how many words those guys use. That's what I did. And anyway, back to the beginning, huge fan of Tad Williams. When I started submitting my novel, Forgetting Moon, to agents, I figured out who Tad Williams' agent was. Turns out Tad Williams' agent is a well-known agent in New York City who represents a lot of fantasy writers who write big, fat, epic fantasies. So I submitted my book to that agent. That agent also represents Pat Rothfuss and a few other big names. And I said, hey, you represent Tad Williams, Pat Rothfuss. I know you're not afraid of big books. Well, I've got a big book for you. Guess what? Signed with that agent. He got me a book deal. Dream come true, right? Well, that agent hooked me up also with meeting my favorite fantasy author of all time, Tad Williams. So I got to spend time. There's a video we've got here on YouTube on my channel with me and Tad Williams and my agent at the Salt Lake City Comic-Con discussing how to get published. So I'll provide a link to that up at the top at the end of this video, along with some links to some other things. But if you want to watch me and Tad Williams and my agent discussed how to get published, I'll show you that video. It's about an hour-long video. We filmed it at Comic-Con. It's great. Great information for how to get published. I got to meet the guy. I got to meet my literary hero, and that is rare. I got to hang out with him, got to have dinner with him several times. I've got to hang out with him at Comic-Cons, have lunch, dinner, just pal around with the dude. It's not often that your dreams come true to the point where you get to meet your heroes. In fact, he signed every book. I brought a box of books for him to sign. He signed every single one of my books. This one reads, "Thank you for the honor of being at least part responsible for your writing. It's been a great pleasure, Tad Williams." Hey, I'm telling you folks, some of my reviews, and we're going to get to some of them. So far I've been reviewing a lot of Stephen King books and a lot of other books of authors I haven't met and stuff. I'll be getting to some reviews where I've hung out with these dudes. I know I did some of the Brandon Sanderson ones where a lot of these guys I have hung out with, and a lot of these reviews I'm going to talk about how great of people some of these dudes are. I just am. I think it's going to be a unique spin for my channel that you get a kind of a behind the scenes look at a lot of this stuff. Let's talk about Dragonbone Chair. Enough about me and my gushing and my fan gushing. Let's talk about Dragonbone Chair. It's the perfect fantasy series. Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn is the perfect fantasy series, in my opinion. No one's done it better. I mean, I loved everything about this from the very first word. You know, it starts out, it's a very typical kind of fantasy story where a young orphan boy, a prophecy of doom, a dark lord that's going to come and kill everybody, unless the orphan boy can find out his heritage and the magic items can be found to fight off the bad guys. Very, very standard, trope-ish stuff. But that's why it's awesome. That's why it's awesome. Don't knock the tropes, people. The tropes are awesome. And Tad Williams was the first guy to take these tropes and spin them and twist them, turn them on their head, and make things unexpected about them. Everybody knows the story of George R.R. Martin saying that this was the series that inspired him to write Game of Thrones, because this is the series that came out and put fantasy on the map as something that could be taken seriously, as serious literature, and not just fluffy adventure stories. Because everybody could see that Tad Williams was writing on a level higher than everybody else. He was doing like war and peace fantasy. He was the Tolstoy of the fantasy genre for a long time. And when these books were coming out, each one of them was anticipated as not like Harry Potter or anything, but anticipated across the world with much anticipation. That's how popular of a guy he was when these things were hot in the late 80s and early 90s. Because he was writing a different type of fantasy than nobody had ever read before, where the stakes were serious, the characters seemed so real, and the writing was so beautiful, and the action was so on spot, and the pacing was just right, and the characters, he explored the characters like nobody else had explored characterization before, where there was, you know, it wasn't just good versus evil, although that was the setup for the plot. It was more of gray areas. It wasn't grimdark by any means. You know, that came later in a history of fantasy. But Tad Williams was certainly getting us on the road of people taking fantasy stories seriously again. You know, we went from J.R.R. Tolkien to a lot of just fun, quick adventure fantasy stories. And Tad Williams really broke the mold. And people were noticing. You know, I went over the plot before, very trope heavy, but he changes it. As you read through it and you follow Simon on his adventure, he's our main character. And the thing I love about the Dragonbone Chair is we get to spend a lot of time with our main character in the castle, in the Hayolt. It's called the Hayolt. The land is called Austin Ard. He's in a castle called the Hayolt. The king has died. There's two sons, two princes vying for the throne, Elias and Joshua. Elias has a young daughter named Miriam El. Elias also has a bad advisor named Pirates. You know, in the Audible version, they call them Pirates or Pirates. I call them Pirates I've read this thing 10 times. Every time I read it, it's Pirates. He's the baddie. You know, and Simon spends a lot of time in the castle before the adventure starts, just figuring out that there's a weird mystery going on in his land. You know, and there's a kind of a wizard guy that's sort of Morganes. I don't know the name. Can't pronounce the name. I know the name, can't pronounce it. Who is sort of like the wizard kind of character that sort of tutors Simon, takes him under wing, tells him about the land, tells him about the dangers. Things go bad at the castle about a third of the way through the book. Things go to crap at the castle. And I'm not going to get into a whole lot of specifics because it's the fun of it's just reading it on your own and figuring it out. But Simon has to flee the castle through the dungeons. Oh my gosh. If you like books with dungeons, if you like the scenes in Lord of the Rings where they're traveling through the mines of Moria, Simon escaping through the dungeons, gripping, haunting. When he crawls out of the dungeons and the things that he sees right out if he gets out of the dungeons are amazing. Haunting, gripping, pagan, witches, devil-worshipping type, just action-adventure that he's avoiding at every corner. People are chasing him. He's all on his own. He's left the castle, and he runs into, of course, his cast of characters that propel him on the quest for Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. The three swords that they need to find to fight the bad people. And that's the plot. That's the plot. Simon goes on his adventures, and he runs into, you know, Benedict the troll, Sluttig, sort of the Viking guy. You know, a lot of people go along on this adventure with him, and he keeps collecting companions along the way. Meanwhile, we get scenes of Joshua and Elias who remain at the castle, or they go off on adventures of their own, and Pirates, the bad guy. We get everybody. Everybody is vying for the three swords, Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. In the first book, second book, and the third book, 1, 2, 3. That's the plot of all of them. But I'm telling you, as simple as that sounds, it's not that simple. The world building, that's another thing. Fantasy had not seen world building on this scope since Tolkien. You know, there was pretty good world building in Raymond Feist's books, in Dragonlance, in the Belgariad, in the Shannara series, the big fantasies of the 70s and 80s. There was decent world building, but nobody had leveled up to that Tolkien-type level where they were writing their own elven languages and the dwarves had their own languages and the elves had their own languages. And Tad Williams did all that. He created all of that stuff that Tolkien did. And every name, whether it's a character or a place in this book, is solidly grounded in reality. If there's a group of characters from one part of the realm, the naming system of it sounds like they all belong to the same clan, the same families. Then you cross the realm in a whole different naming system. I mean, it all makes sense, just like Tolkien did. It just was not done to this extent until Tad Williams did it. You know, and after Tad Williams, of course, we got some of the bigger names like Robert Jordan certainly started to do that. You know, and George R.R. Martin, Stephen Erickson, and myself and a bunch of others really decided to take it as world building. We wanted to make world building an art form in and of itself, just as Tad Williams and Tolkien had did it. And it's a real art form. And I'm going to do some writing advice videos where I talk about world building and things like that, and talk about what an art form it is in literature unto itself. And Tad Williams is one of the grandfathers of this. Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, if you are into very detailed world building that's solid, that includes everything that you need to know about the world in great detail, at the same time having a great adventure story going along with it, Tad Williams is the guy. I mean, I don't know what more I can say. I don't want to give away the plots or the endings or the twists and turns of the books. I just want you to know how fucking awesome it is. Not only that, but I met the guy, and he's a great guy. He's one of my favorite people, one of my favorite authors I've ever met. I can't gush on and on and on enough about what Tad Williams means to me personally, and to the fantasy genre as a whole, because he's inspired so many of us, like myself, Brandon Sanderson, George R.R. Martin, Pat Rothfuss. All of us read Tad Williams when we were younger. Except for maybe George R.R. Martin. George R.R. Martin's an old guy. He's older than Tad. Anyway, you get what I'm saying. Inspiration. If you're a fantasy writer, if you want to dive into one of the seminal books in the fantasy genre that really left a mark and that really was an inspiration to a lot of other authors, this is a must read. Start with Dragonbone Chair, move on to the Stone of Farewell, finish with To Green Angel Tower, and then get all the rest of his books that he's written, because he's done a great job. He's got a great catalog of books that he's written. Dragonbone Chair. Let's rate it. You know my ratings. I rate things 1 through 10. This one's a 10 plus. This one's 11. If we could dial it up to 11, we would. In fact, if this was music, if this was loud music, we would dial this one up to stun. Not 10, not 11. This one would go up to stun. This book, if this was a rock album and you turned it up to stun, it would shake your house so much your whole house would fall down. And your neighbors' houses would fall down. In fact, you might nuke your whole city. That's how high of a rating this is. Dragonbone Chair, Tad Williams. I'm going to review Stone of Farewell and To Green Angel Tower soon, so look forward to those videos. But until then, do yourself a favor. Do the world a favor. Start reading books, and start with this one, The Dragonbone Chair. And must I say, look at that Michael Whalen painting. You know, holding this up close to the camera, I'm like, Michael Whalen was an awesome, awesome illustrator. Look at that painting. It's just amazing.